Hello and welcome to another episode of Who Knew in the Moment, the podcast. I'm your host, Phil Friedrich, and today I'm honored to have Nick Hutchinson with me. Nick is the founder of BookThinkers and he's an author as well, and we're going to get to talk about the new book. But one of the things that I think you're going to take away from our story is life is not just about taking in information, it's about the application from the information. And Nick has done that extremely well in his life, and it's helped him get to where he's at. So, Nick, thanks so much for being on today.
Yeah, man, there is no place I'd rather be. I love your podcast. I love the conversations that you have. I love some of the people that you've interviewed recently. And so, yeah, I feel blessed to be here.
You bet. Well, we're honored to have you, my man. So just for, kind of getting started, not everyone knows if they're going to go to college or once they go to college, if they know, hey, this is going to result in exactly what I want. But you decided to go to the University of New Hampshire and study some business. So talk a little bit about, deciding to go to college. Was that something parents, promoted or I would say strongly suggested, or was that kind of a decision that you decided to make?
Yeah, I grew up in a suburban community outside of Boston, Massachusetts. It was pretty affluential. I grew up in a middle-class family. And I think that, I don't know, I'm just guessing maybe 90% of the kids that I graduated with went to college. It was an expectation that guidance counselors and teachers set up for us.
Yeah.
I took AP classes in high school, which are essentially college prep classes where you get credits. And so it just felt like that was the only option. Now, what's interesting about that is that although my parents strongly encouraged that I went to college, I didn't even consider an alternative. My mom and dad didn't go to school. My mom had a 2-year degree. My dad never went to college, yet they were both pretty successful. So I think going to college, I went because I wanted the social experience. I wanted to have fun. I wanted to party. But in the back of my head, there was this, why am I going and spending all this money? Like, you guys didn't do this. So I enjoyed my experience at UNH, but most of the value came from the social side of things.
Yes. So talking about that, you've referenced, hey, I was in school, didn't necessarily love school, but yeah, there was social value. So I decided to get an internship. And at this internship, a mentor of yours suggests, hey, maybe check out some books. And so talk a little bit about that, what books they were and, why you even wanted to listen to that mentor.
Yeah, it's a great place to start things off. So I take this internship. I have about an hour commute each way. And at first, he recommends personal development podcasts. I start listening to shows just like this one, where a host is interviewing a guest. Those guests were talking about how they had become successful. And so many of them were giving credit to books. And I was thinking, I'm not really into this personal development type stuff. I'm not a reader. I'm an athlete. I'm a jock stereotype. This isn't for me. But over and over and over and over again, I was hearing the same titles like Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, The Total Money Makeover by Dave Ramsey, The Richest Man in Babylon by George S. Clason, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. And after a while, listening to these over and over and over again, I said to myself, there's clearly something that I'm missing out on. And so I decided to start reading these books. I went over to a local Barnes and Noble bookstore. I had my list in hand. I found all of the books I was looking for. And because this internship was not very demanding, I was there. I had to clock in and out. So I was there for 8 hours every day, but I really only had a few hours of responsibility. I was given an office. So I would close the office door and I started reading these books. And instantly my mind was just blown. It was a humbling experience because each time I opened up one of these books, I realized there was an entire universe of potential that I wasn't aware of before. I was a know-it-all at the time. So yeah, it was humbling, but I was also excited. I was like, wow. I mean, now I realize why people are reading these books. It's because there's decades of information and lived experience and obstacles being condensed into what I can consume in just a few hours. Like, how cool is that?
Yeah. So with those books, and you have a mentor that's suggesting certain books to read, was there then kind of like back and forth dialogue, or was this just your golden nugget to now have and figure out what to do with it?
There was a little bit of back and forth dialogue, but there wasn't a ton. I mean, I was in this office space where everybody kind of kept to themselves. I would go on car rides with him from time to time and we'd have conversation. As I started to read more and more and it started to become part of my personality, I would then start to have a little bit more dialogue with him. And I remember I was sitting, we had taken a sales trip together, and I was sitting at a bar in Chicago with him. And he had started talking to me about how I was implementing everything from these books. And I remember him saying, "Hey, Nick, like, I don't think you realize that most people never read books. And those that do rarely take notes.
Yeah.
Of the ones that take notes, even a smaller number of these people are actually implementing these books into their lives and creating real behavior change." And he gave me sort of a metaphorical pat on the back over a couple of drinks in Chicago on this trip. And I started to internalize that. I'm like, you know what? Yeah, you're right. Nobody else is doing this type of stuff. I was just so in my lane that I didn't even realize it was weird at the time. And so we started to talk a little bit more about it. And I think that when you make something like personal development books part of your personality, it attracts more of those types of conversations. So all of a sudden, people were telling me about a book that they had read, or they were telling me, "Hey, I saw you post on social media about this type of book and I actually bought it. I'm planning on reading it." And so, yeah, those conversations started to happen a little bit more.
Well, so let's dive into that a little bit, and it does parlay into future you, but it's a timely opportunity to chat through it. So many people take in a bunch of content and they hear it and they're aware of it, but they don't apply it, right? I mean, shoot, the number of people I've heard say, if only I'd get up 30 minutes earlier, like I could probably work out every day. And I know that's really a good way to start my day, but you're not doing it. Or if only I would, be disciplined with how I run my calendar or my finances, I know that these things would happen, but they're not doing it. So talk a little bit about some of the techniques you use to not only just read a book, but then remember it and implement it.
Yeah, it's only through action that you can transform information into behavior change, right? Like, you have to get up off your butt and act. And so there are a ton of frameworks that I teach in this book, Rise of the Reader. One of my favorites is setting an intention for each book that you're reading.
Mm,
I like to use the SMART goal framework. So your intention for the book should be specific.
yeah.
It should be measurable. So an example might be, "Hey, I'm reading Limitless by Jim Quick, and I'm looking for 2 ways to improve my reading speed." So that's measurable. You know whether or not it happens. Is that attainable? Of course it is. Not making $10 million by the end of the year, but I'm looking for 2 ways to improve my reading speed that I can implement. It needs to be like, this one is up for debate a little bit. Relevant. Obviously, it's going to be relevant, but I like to write it down. So I like to take, the R in SMART goal
Yeah.
and say write. So you've got to write it down. I like to put my goals in activity trackers. I like to write my intention on the inside cover of the book that I'm reading.
Cool.
So there's a couple ways that happens. And then the T is time bound. So it's not, "Hey, I just want to change my life." It's, "No, I'm looking for 2 ways to improve my reading speed by reading this book and implement them by the end of next week."
Mm,
And if you can add a little bit of flavor to it, you can add a "because" at the end. Why are you looking to improve your reading speed? That will help attach some more emotion to the book that you're reading. Now, imagine you pick up Limitless by Jim Quick, and on the inside cover, you have that intention written down.
yeah.
"I am looking to find and implement 2 techniques for improving my reading speed by the end of next week, because I've always been a slow reader and it bums me out every time I pick up a book. I know that by reading more efficiently and faster, I'll get more out of the books I'm reading and stay on track."
Mm,
And if you read that intention each and every time you open up that book, you're far more likely, number one, to be excited about the book. But number two, your brain will help you filter for ways to fulfill that intention. So you'll probably find those 2 things. And that's all you should underline and circle while you're reading, things related to fulfilling your intention. That's an example of a reading strategy that I think is too underutilized. But if you're very clear, you're more likely to take action because you know exactly what your mission is.
mm.
And Phil, I can't tell you how many times I meet somebody at a networking event or a conference and I say, "What are you reading?" And they'll say, "Oh, I'm reading insert book title."
Yeah.
Why? And they'll just go, well, I don't know. Somebody recommended it to me. It's like the likelihood that that person's going to take action on what they're reading is very small because they don't even know why they're reading the book in the first place.
Yeah.
Have a very clear intention. That's kind of step one in my process.
So I love that. And, guilty as charged. So I'm not a good reader. I didn't get to read, or I wasn't able to read until much later than like the normal kid. And so like part of that's probably a limiting belief, but two is it just truly does take me a fair amount of time to read. But I kept hearing the same thing you had heard, hey, read books, like it's good. So I was like, all right, I'll do one a month. And then the next year I set a 2 a month goal. And eventually I got to 4 books a month. But what I realized was I was reading all these books I was hearing about, but then I was just putting them on a shelf and moving on with my life. And I had highlighted some great things that, maybe they were catchy phrases or, I like to reference them every once in a while, but they weren't becoming a actionable step. And so I love how you mentioned pick two things out, right? What are the intentions? And then pick two things that are going to help me put that intention into action for my life to better it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, exactly. And you're far more likely to take action when it's manageable, right? We all know that saying, how do you eat an elephant? One
Yep.
bite at a time. The first time that I read Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, I highlighted over 100 different things. How the heck is somebody supposed to implement and retain 100 different concepts from a book? Not possible.
Yeah.
It would have been far more beneficial in my life if I had just said, hey, let's find one or two, maybe 3 or 4 things from this book that I can take into action and revisit frequently. Right.
Yep.
So, yeah, I think by making something more digestible, more ready for action, it's far better than just trying to implement 100 things from a book.
Absolutely. Now, to go back in time, right, and to reference, all right, so we're in our internship, we're finishing up college, we've started to read books, we've started, think in the personal development space. We would love to say, well, day one, Nick just went ahead and started a company and he's just been an entrepreneur since day one. But to start with, you said, well, maybe I will go the more conventional route and get a job with somebody, but I'm going to also start working towards this goal in this business simultaneously. So talk a little bit about picking the choice of starting business while you're doing work for another company and taking risks that way.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was earlier in college, I ran my own house painting business for 2 summers. I hired a bunch of my friends. I would go door to door. I would sell these house painting jobs. And I realized I was not a great salesperson. So the internship that we mentioned before was really my first attempt at working for a traditional company, working for other people who knew how to sell so that I could learn from them. I carried that internship into a full-time job. So although I had interviewed at a ton of companies in the process of graduating school, the company that I was interning at had the most upside potential from my perspective. So I decided to stay with that company, Profit Tools. As I was working for Profit Tools, I told everybody that would listen, including the owner of the company, I want to start my own business someday, and I'm here to learn from everybody so that
Yeah.
I can make that a reality. As I started BookThinkers, I knew that number one, I didn't have an emergency fund or a nest egg that I could rely on to go out and start a business. So
Yeah.
I decided, let me learn from other people. Let me build this as a side hustle slowly. And that took years and years and years of, I'd call it, I had a 9 to 5 and then I had a 5 to 9, right?
Yeah.
So years and years and years of spending most of my time working for somebody else, and then a smaller percentage of my time working for myself. And over time, I started to gain traction. I believe that one of the biggest issues with the US public education system is that we're taught failure is a bad thing. But it was through failure and iteration and trial and error that I was able to build the business that I have today, which will cross the 7-figure mark in total revenue this year, 2023. And that started all the way back when we're talking, which was 2016, 2017, when I first started, hey, I want to start a side hustle called BookThinkers. So it took a long time to get to where I am today. But it was those small little baby steps. So I would literally sit in the office, do my work all day, and then I would hang out after the office was closed And some of the other guys would hang around and we would talk entrepreneurship and investing and do we want to build a business one day and what would it look like? And it was kind of like maybe somebody would break out a bottle of whiskey or something like that. And it became a very fun tradition to
Yeah.
dream and to think big. And so I had a couple of my friends that I started BookThinkers with, and we legally registered the business on day one because I knew that by doing that, I would be a business owner. Even if that business wasn't doing any revenue,
Yeah.
I had a business. I made business cards. We got a logo designed on 99designs.com. I found, I purchased the domain name, the URL. I just wanted to be a business owner. Now, it took, I think, over another year before that business actually had any revenue. Like the first dollar was made. All we did was spend money for a while. But it was like fun, man. It was like a playground, an opportunity to exercise creativity. And like I said, it wasn't a full-time thing. I didn't jump before the parachute was built. I knew that if I had done that, I'd be operating from a place of scarcity and I would be negotiating on values. And I didn't want to do that.
Yeah. So let's dive into a little bit of that. You mentioned, hey, there were people that I started to talk to about this idea, right? And if you've heard the comment, we are the future, or our future is determined by the books we read. The second part is always, and the people we surround ourselves with. And some people listening to you right now are saying, Nick, that sounds great, but man, that 5 to 9 slot, like I like to go out. I like to go spend time with my friends. I like to go do this and that. And I think it's not for everyone, right? Because there are inherent sacrifices you made to start this business that, yes, you missed out on certain opportunities, but you also now have this other opportunity that maybe someone that wasn't willing to take that risk doesn't have. So talk a little bit about, that maybe internal battle at that phase in life.
Yeah, it started in college because I went to a party school. We would go out Thursday, Friday, Saturday nights. We would have, different drink nights at different bars and stuff like that. And you'd wake up in the morning and you'd feel hungover and you'd be unproductive. But that's just what it was like to be a college kid.
Yeah.
And as I started to read these books and started to visualize a more successful life for me, I would read things like, short-term sacrifices, long-term gains. And you would read, hustle 24/7. You need to put off short-term pleasure so that you can live the life that you want forever, those types of things. And I didn't want to fully commit to that when I was in college. So what I did was I would stay in on Thursday nights. So on Thursday nights, while everybody was losing brain cells at the bar, I was building new neural pathways. That's the way that I talked to myself about it.
Yeah.
And I would still party on Friday and Saturday nights. I'd have friends come up and visit. Like I was a normal guy.
Yeah.
But on Thursday nights, I would sit in my dorm room or my apartment and I would read personal development and nonfiction books throughout my senior year, or at least like half of my senior year.
Yeah.
And I got a lot of weird looks. I got a lot of texts and I had this fear of missing out a little bit. But I was reading that this was the way that you could become successful. And instead of fully committing to it, I partially committed to it. But those years were foundational for me because I started to gain momentum. And what happened was I was reading a lot of sales, marketing, communication, persuasion, negotiation style books, and I was applying those to my full-time job once I graduated. So I was starting to make a pretty good amount of money as a 21, 22, 23-year-old kid, 6 figures in commissions. And that was a result of the books that I was reading. And what's funny is that money enabled me to start traveling, doing more. If I went to the club, it was buying a table at the club, not just standing in the general dance area or whatever, right? And so by dedicating a portion of my time to personal development, when I had fun, I was having more fun than anybody else was capable of having. And it came originally because of money and ultimately as a result of flexibility and building my own business. But here I am today. I'm 29 years old. I've been to 25 different countries, sometimes for up to 3 months at a time. And that's more fun than going to a local bar every night for 10 years, right?
Yeah.
So I had some sacrifices up front, but the result paid off pretty fast through the additional flexibility and everything. And I'll mention one more thing. I did receive a lot of criticism from friends and family, people that knew me that would say, hey, don't waste your weekends on work.
Yeah.
because they considered working on yourself work. I didn't. I thought it
Yeah.
was fun. I enjoyed it. They would say, don't sacrifice your 20s in order to build a business. You're going to regret that. I've lived my 20s more than anybody I know
Yeah.
because I was working on
Yeah.
myself. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
kind of like Jocko Willink's discipline equals freedom.
Mhm.
My version of that is the more you work on boring stuff, the more fun your life actually is. The
Yes.
more you focus on fun, the more boring your life actually becomes in the long term. It's kind of backwards. Society has it wrong, I think.
Yeah. Well, and I love what you're saying there. And one thing, you and I have similar pathway of, our 20s was a really formative time frame. Now I'm a little bit older. I'm 32, you're 29. But there's a book that I encountered, I think I was 24 or 25, and it was called The Defining Decade by Meg Jay. I don't know if you've read that one or
I
not.
haven't read it, but I've heard
But
some good things.
yeah, and I mean, it just talks about how the 20s is really the launching pad for your future. And it doesn't mean that somebody that, has fun in their 20s and doesn't really start taking things serious until their 30s can't have a successful life. It's just saying there's a lot of things that you can be setting the stage for in your 20s that can make the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, more enjoyable or easier, if you will, because you've done a lot of the groundwork in those 20 years.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I've loved my 20s more than everybody who criticized me by saying, "Hey, you shouldn't be working on yourself so much. Go out and have fun." Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. That your 20s are the foundation for who you will become. And there's that James Clear thing, like where you are today is the result of the habits and actions that you've had for the last couple of years.
Hmm.
And so the optimistic side of that is that where you're going to be in 10 years is a result of the habits and actions that you're participating in today. And you have full agency over those. If you want to change who you're going to be in 10 years, like that conversation starts now.
I love it. Yes. So the next part, you mentioned partners, and I've heard you mention Ryan. There could have been others, I don't know, but maybe talk a little bit about, why you decided to have partners in the venture opposed to, hey, this is really something I'm passionate about. I just want to do it myself as I get started.
Yeah. So originally, I started BookThinkers with my friend Alec.
Okay.
Alec and I had both run house painting businesses together, and we would sit at UNH on weekends or weeknights in these rooms that had whiteboards essentially. And we would sketch out business ideas because we both had that taste of entrepreneurship. I mean, it
Yeah.
wasn't fully entrepreneurship, but we were very close to it. And we would always just come every week with a list of problems that we had encountered. Now, I had started reading a lot of books and people are asking me the same questions about them. And I thought there needs to be a place for me to document my biggest takeaways from the books I'm reading so that I can just send somebody a link to a website. That was the original version of this, the original idea, so they can read my book review and not bug me about all the details. So Alec and I started BookThinkers together, but very quickly, like within a few weeks, we brought my friend Derek into the fold. So Derek was a childhood friend of mine. He was very entrepreneurial. He always had been. And I think he was looked at as kind of strange for that when we were in
Yeah.
college because, but he came into the business. And so it was the three of us for a couple of years. Now, we had attempted so many different forms of monetization strategies and frameworks that were unsuccessful. We tried to launch an app together, didn't work. We had outsourced it to a company in Argentina that eventually fell apart, and we didn't have enough money to keep it going. But what was interesting about that period of time was that we knew we wanted to sell this app into an audience. So we started posting on social media.
Yeah.
And as we started to post on social media, we started to gain a following, and a different form of monetization opportunity appeared, which was that authors said, "Hey, can we pay you to review our books? Because your audience is my target audience," type of conversation. So I started to do that myself.
Yeah.
Derek's other business, Label Radar, really started to take off. He's now sold it in the 7-figure mark somewhere and had a lot of success with it. So I'm happy that he decided to leave and pursue his passion. Alec had just other priorities at the time and said, "Hey, I'm not really interested in continuing to dedicate all this time and money to a business that's not making any money. We're in
Yeah.
our 20s. Not everybody can focus on that." And so we just decided to part ways. I continued with BookThinkers until Ryan came into the picture. And Ryan who's no longer involved on an active day-to-day side for the business. Ryan is somebody who came in and said, hey, like, I love this foundation that you're building. I want to help and pour into it. And that's what he did for years. We spent a couple years working together, trying out additional monetization strategies, most of which didn't work. But this book review thing kept building. It just kept building. The audience kept getting bigger. People were paying more for book reviews. And so that's ultimately what enabled us to build a company that exists today, which has 7 full-time employees and works with over 100 authors a year. I know I'm kind of jumping ahead in the story, but yeah, partnerships can be tough, man. Like, I have great relationships with everybody today, but it's tough when you want to start a business with other people. It really is.
Yeah, so 100% it is. Right. I mean, they say it's just like another marriage. I mean, that's just kind of the way it is. Now, on your side of things and just kind of looking at it across the way, I think so many people have an idea, it doesn't quite work, and they just say, all right, well, it didn't work, hey, Argentina app blew up, forget it. Or hey, we tried this monetization strategy, it's not working, whatever. At least we tried, right? And they settle there. Your mindset was not that, right? Your mindset was, I'm going to figure it out. I just haven't figured it out yet. So talk a little bit about, having that resiliency and continuing to go back to it, even though we've had multiple ideas and strategies that didn't work the way we were hoping they would have worked.
Yeah. When I think about BookThinkers, I think about 5 or 10 different businesses that have failed under the name BookThinkers, and only one that's been successful, which exists today. So you're totally right. And yeah, as Michael Gerber states, I think 95% of small businesses fail within the first 5 years. And BookThinkers is no different. I mean, 9 out of 10 of my businesses have failed under this umbrella, but I just didn't give up. It never really was an option for me. I continued to iterate, take feedback, try new things. It was a playground. And I think the important thing was that I kept a full-time job while I was going through this process. If I didn't have a full-time income coming from profit tools throughout this entire process, the business would have died off because I wouldn't have been able to financially support all of these failures, But I don't know, man. I never pictured myself as somebody working for somebody else long-term. Like, BookThinkers had to work, not from this stoic against all odds type of perspective, but just like, I genuinely enjoyed trying to figure this thing out. It's like business as a game, you'll hear that sometimes. It was a game that I wanted to figure out, and I wanted to serve my younger self. I wanted to help the version of myself at 21 years old that discovered these books. I wanted to help them get there faster. I wanted to prove to myself and other people that by reading business books, you can build a business that's successful, right? And through every one of those failures, like I was saying, in the US education system, you should be taught that you're getting closer to the truth, to a successful opportunity. Instead of getting a C or a D in school and feeling really bad about it, that's just part of the process. And that's kind of how all these books encourage me to keep going.
Yeah, well, and to that point, I think it's a difference if you didn't succeed because of a lack of effort, or you didn't succeed because the idea just, you had a good idea, it just didn't end up, panning out the way that was supposed to, right? And it sounds like every time you tried something, it wasn't because of lack of trying, right? It was, well, I put my best foot forward, I did all the things I could to have it be successful. It just didn't end up working out the way that I had originally intended for it to be, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Now, the second thing I'll say, and this will kind of segue us into some of the folks that you've been able to connect with. Lewis Howes has a interview where he talks about relationships, and he says, the false thing we learn is that love is enough. Like, for your marriage to work, if you just say you love each other, like, that's enough. And he goes, unfortunately, love is a feeling, it's fleeting, it's not enough. You have to make the decision to be committed. And once you make that decision, then the love is helpful, but like, you have to make the decision that, like, no, we're not going to get divorced, right? Like, we are going to do everything we can to make this work. And as I hear you talking about the business, that idea resonates with me, right? Like, it's not enough to just say, well, I want to start a business, because if that's it, well, eventually you have 2, 3 things that don't go well. And you're like, you know what, profit tools is enough. Like, I'll just do that. It's a little bit easier, less time constriction. I'll get 4 hours a day back in my time. Like, we'll do that route. But for you, to your point, it wasn't like this, hey, it has to work because otherwise my life is over. But the decision or the mindset was this has to work.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I love that Lewis Howes metaphor. I think it's perfect for the situation that I went through. It's not the love of entrepreneurship, like it is gonna have to work. So yeah, I love that. That's cool. Thanks for bringing that up.
You bet. So to use that, you and Lewis had the opportunity to connect and talk about that one. And I've got a couple of people that I want to highlight of just interviews and conversations you've had that stuck out to me. I'm sure there's others that stick out to you, but for sure stuck out to me.
Yeah, well, Lewis is an amazing human. I'll tell this. I'm sure everybody in your audience, Phil, is aware of who Lewis is. He's exactly who he is on camera, off camera,
Mm,
meaning I was able to connect. So Lewis followed BookThinkers way back in the day, years and years and years ago. And I had made a few attempts at building a relationship with him, having him on our podcast to talk about previous books. And he would say things like, hey, not in book promo mode right now, but reach out to me next time I put out a book. Well, we decided to go to his Summit of Greatness last year in Ohio, and it was seriously an 11 out of 10 experience in terms
mm.
of production and networking and education. And I brought my team, so we all got to like hang out and get some different type of experiences together. And we bumped into Lewis, and he said he knew who we were immediately. He's like, "Hey Nick, what's going on, man? Like, thank you for bringing the team here." I said, "Hey, I'd love to help promote your book," which he had announced at the conference. And he said, "If you want to spend a day at my offices, my studio, we could do a podcast. We can hang out a little bit. You can avoid the Boston cold and come to LA. It'll be a little bit warmer." And I thought, that's pretty cool. I said, "Hey, Lewis, like I'm the type of guy that will take you up on that. Don't
Yeah,
offer
right.
it if you don't mean it." And he's like, "No, man, I mean it." So I followed up when it got cold. I said, "Hey, Lewis, it's cold in Boston. I'd like to find some time to come out with my team." And he was like, "Yeah, sure. Here's my assistant or whatever. Like, let's pick a day." So we went out and we spent a day with Lewis and we hung out and, we played basketball in his office and ping pong. And we just sat on the couch and talked for a while. And he broke down the BookThinkers business and made a bunch of recommendations, talked through some partnership stuff with me. And we recorded a podcast interview. He then invited one of his friends, an author in Q, to come by the studio and record another interview with us. He's somebody who I had already read some of his work, and so I was familiar with him, and we just got to hang out. It was like the coolest experience ever. And yeah, Lewis is, I mean, he's a genuinely good human being who just wants to help everybody else.
I love it. You additionally got to have Robert Greene on, and Robert, is once again great author. Talk a little bit about the connections in that opportunity.
Sure. Well, I believe I've got a lot of things to say about networking. I'll try to be short-winded here.
Yeah.
The first is this metaphor of the hot girl at the bar. So the hot girl at the bar, nobody talks to her because they have a fear of being rejected. They
Yeah.
anticipate rejection, so they don't talk to her. So she's there thinking, nobody wants to talk to me, right? Because everybody has this perceived level of rejection. So she walks out of the bar at the end of the night. Nobody talked to her. She's feeling down. And all the guys walk out of the bar like, oh, you know what? I regret. I wish I asked her out, whatever the case is. And the same kind of thing happens on social media with authors and business personalities. Like the more followers they have, the less likely the average person is to reach out because the perceived level of rejection is high. Like, oh, why should I even reach out to Robert? He's not going to see my message. He has 1 million followers. He's famous. No chance. So what happens? Nobody reaches out. And I know this because when BookThinkers had 10, 20,000 followers, I literally used to get 100 DMs per day. Literally. I would spend an hour or 2 hours a day answering messages.
Mm.
Now we have about 140,000 followers, get a handful of DMs per day, maybe. And I've connected with a lot of people at conferences or, somebody will reach out and say, hey, you probably won't see this message, but I wanted to ask about a book recommendation, and I'll answer it. And then I'll go, why did you think I wouldn't see this? And they'll just go, oh, I just assumed because of the follower account, you wouldn't connect with me.
Yeah.
So the lesson here is like, these people are far more accessible than I think the average person thinks they are. And so I just shoot for it now. Robert Greene. So I had gotten Ryan Holiday on the podcast.
Yeah.
And I knew Robert Greene and Ryan Holiday were very close. Ryan was tutored under Robert for a long time. And so there's a cool hack to networking, which is that trust is transitive. If I can show Robert that Ryan trusts me, he can bypass all the due diligence and say, listen, if Ryan said yes, I should say yes. I don't need to go through and look at his podcast and ask how many downloads he gets and the whole 9 yards. So the minute that I got Ryan, I mentioned that to Robert a few different ways. I think probably email, to his assistant, on LinkedIn, on Instagram, just short message. Hey, Robert, we love supporting authors like you. We have an audience of over 100,000 followers on social media that would love to hear what you have to say about the 48 Laws of Power now that it's been out for 20 years. P.S. Ryan Holiday is coming on next week. And it'd be so cool to have you guys back-to-back episodes or something.
Yeah.
And bang, bang, that's how it happened. So yeah, it was really, I mean, that was one of the conversations that I was very nervous for, because he's a 6 times New York Times bestselling author. He's a very serious, powerful human being, and you don't want to mess that one up.
Yeah,
So
right. I love it. Well, once again, I would be shortchanging you if I didn't list everyone, but I mean, you've also had Grant Cardone's, Alex Moses, and people of that nature. And so all of that to be said, you've created an impressive list of different people you've been able to connect with. Well, as you've grown your knowledge base and you've read a bunch of books, you thought, well, gosh, I should probably share a little bit of what I've learned in book form. So talk a little bit about, the rise of the reader and just kind of the premise of that. And once again, you already had a good gold nugget earlier on the Smart Bee, but talk a little bit about the book and how it came to be you wanting to write that.
over the years of running the BookThinkers community, I have interacted with thousands and thousands of readers, and hundreds of them, maybe even more, have said some form of, hey, Nick, I'm reading all of these amazing books that you recommend, and I get so excited visualizing this amazing future for myself, but I'm having a hard time translating information into action and real behavior change. So what frameworks exist for you? And I'm sitting back thinking, of course I answer every single message that BookThinkers gets. And so I would send voice notes mentioning different tips and tricks and strategies. And I just thought, you know what, I'm doing a disservice because I have more to offer these people. And it could come in the form of a blog, but what's the one thing I know for a fact all of these people that follow BookThinkers do? They read. So why don't I write a book about how to implement books? And it sounded kind of goofy at first, but as I started putting pen to paper, or fingers to a keyboard, I started to realize that how I implement books is very different from anything that I've read before. These frameworks and strategies for taking information and translating them into action didn't exist anywhere else that I could find.
Yeah.
And there were some books that had complementary information, like Limitless by Jim Quick touches on a couple similar subjects, or Atomic Habits or the Compound Effect talk about habits a little bit, but there was no singular resource to help people get more out of the books they're reading. So I thought, I'm going to write a book. That realization actually happened a few years ago. So this process has been a very long one for me. Writing a book, I cannot understate how difficult it is. Side note, it's given me a lot more empathy for my clients. So I work with about 100 authors a year on a professional capacity. And without writing a book, I assumed it was far easier than it actually is to get it done the right way. So yeah, that's who I'm writing for, man. There was a little bit of imposter syndrome. Who am I to write a book? Well, if you can serve somebody 1 or 2 steps behind where you're currently at, I think that's enough value. So who am I writing this book for? It's the version of me that realized he had unfulfilled potential. There was a difference between where I was and where I wanted to be. And I just didn't know how to get there. And because of that inaction, I was stagnant. And so, yeah, I'm trying to solve that problem for who I used to be and give you the roadmap. Here's how you can leverage billions of dollars worth of experience and thousands of years worth of experience in just a few hours. How cool is that? You can't do that any other way. And by the way, it only costs $20 a piece.
Yeah.
I love it.
Absolutely. Well, and I think, when you talk about goals and what we have, like everyone has a little bit of a desire for some type of a legacy, right? And I mean, what more prominent of a way to create a legacy than to have something that literally can impact people's lives on the way that they're reading books and then able to take that and change their lives just like you've been able to do through yours.
Yeah, I believe that unfortunately, I mean, you know this, like in the United States, most people are overweight, unhappy, dissatisfied with their relationships, with their jobs. They don't have a purpose, they don't have a meaning, and that stinks.
Yeah.
And I was that way too, less than 10 years ago, and now I've completely solved all of those problems. And it didn't take a ton of time or energy or effort or money. It's just these resources are available. It's like your own experiences and failures obviously provide a ton of value, but you can bypass a lot of that headache by reading about other people's experiences, people who dealt with the same things that you are. And so, like, yeah, I guess I'm trying to say that for the young, motivated professional who's seeking progress and fulfillment but doesn't know how to get there, like I've written this book and condensed my learnings from 400 books, but also how to implement more from the ones they're reading. And I'm like, here's a fast pass, here's a ticket, here's a way to cut the line. Like you don't have
Yeah.
to go through figuring all of this out yourself, because I did it and it worked. And now I want to help other people get there too, because I'm fulfilled by that, man. Like when somebody reads a book recommendation and they implement it and they go, hey, that solved my problem. I now don't have to deal with this, 3 times a day for the next 30 years. Like that's awesome.
Absolutely. Now, somebody listening is saying, Nick, I don't necessarily have the desire to write a book, but I can resonate with the idea that you had this idea 3 years ago or 4 years ago, however many it was, but you're now just taking action today, right? It's not like you had the idea and you're like, all right, burn the boats. I'm going to go take action on it. It took a little while. It took, some laying of groundwork to get there. So, for you, what would be your encouragement to someone that's listening that, once again, maybe it's not writing a book, maybe it is starting a business, maybe it is just starting a 4 hour a week type of a something or other, but what would your encouragement be there?
Yeah, my encouragement would just be baby steps. I mean, when I first decided to write this book 3 years ago, I purchased a few books on writing, and I wanted to understand, how do people go about writing a book? How is it
Mm.
structured? Do people work for 5 minutes a day? Do people write a certain number of pages per day? How do successful authors get a book out there? And also, I've never written anything in my life outside of like academic situations. So how am I supposed to structure these books? I mean, I've read them, but I haven't written them. So I started that way. That was the easiest step that I could accomplish on day one. Go
Yeah.
on Amazon, look up a couple books, press purchase.
Yep.
Then the next step was reading them. And then it was implementing some things from those books. For instance, morning pages is this idea that you just get a blank yellow pad like this, and you just write for 5 or 10 minutes every single day until you fill up a couple pages worth of information. It could be writing about your dreams. It could be writing about whatever.
Mm.
And that's like warming up. You don't step into the gym or onto the track and just start sprinting or working out, and going for PRs. You got to warm up a little bit. So I learned like, oh, you got to warm up while you're writing. That's pretty cool. And I
Yeah.
just started implementing all these little things, and I started building like a skeleton for the book. What do I want to talk about? What do
Yeah.
I think is important related to reading and implementing books? And so, yeah, it was baby steps. And those baby steps happened over a long period of time. I got some accountability partners. I set some goals. I failed to hit them, but I learned, hey, Nick, why are you procrastinating on this? Like, why is it falling in your priority list? Do you not? And I had to deal with some things like imposter syndrome and blah, blah, blah. So what's my encouragement for somebody who wants to start a business or write a book or take action on anything? I think it's just chunk it down until it's super easy. What is the very first step that you can do, and take action on that very first step?
I love it. I think that's great words of wisdom. Nick, is there any other, pivotal moments or things you'd like to share in your story, things you want to highlight for the book launch and release?
Well, I'll mention one other thing. One of my
Yeah.
favorite books of all time is The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. That's
Yeah.
a book that people say is impossible to implement. It's so difficult. You've got to automate, delegate, and eliminate all these low impact things so that you can only work 4 hours a week and travel the world.
Yeah.
And that's what I did. I read the book and I implemented it.
Mm.
Um, I've now been, like I mentioned before, to 25 different countries, sometimes for up to a few months at a time. And if I was to write another book about something unrelated to this world of personal development and reading, it would be travel. I love traveling internationally to countries where I don't speak the primary language, trying new foods, experiencing new adrenaline seeking type things like paragliding or bungee jumping or skydiving or whatever. And through international travel, I've learned a lot about myself too. So
Mm.
I think outside of reading personal development books, the other space in my life that I've learned the most about myself, but also about the world is through travel. And so my book recommendation there, other than the 4-Hour Workweek, is called Vagabonding. It's by Rolf
Yeah.
Potts. And he talks all about the uncommon art of long-term world travel. It's not as
Mm.
expensive as you think, and you can learn more about yourself and use it as a personal development experience and grow. So I just wanted to add that in there because
Well,
I'm not just somebody who reads 24/7 in front of a book, right? Like there's other ways to learn, and I totally acknowledge that.
I love that. And one thing that so to your point, if you haven't read 4 Hour Work Week, great read. But one of the other things that I took away from the 4 Hour Work Week, and it was maybe a little less practical, but it was more of like a mindset thought, is all right, if I work 90 hours this week and I make $200,000, or I worked 70 hours this week and I made $180,000, was the trade-off of the 20 hours worth the 20,000, right? And I think for so many people, it's just like more is better. And it's like, but at what cost? Right. Because with those 20 hours, what else could you have done? Or what other thing would you have enjoyed more than maybe that extra 20,000? And once again, to some people, the 20 grand was worth the 20 hours, and that's fine. But I think for a lot of people, they would open their eyes and say, I only said yes to the more because more is better, not necessarily that that's actually how I wanted to use those hours.
Yeah, more is not always better, that's for sure. And in some cases, there's actually a diminishing return to
Yeah,
more hours into the funnel. Yeah.
absolutely. Well, Nick, you're a wealth of knowledge, my man. I appreciate you and just the relationship we've been able to have for almost, I bet, about a year now, maybe even a little bit longer. And excited for all the things you're continuing to do and all the things you'll do in the future. And you said if you write a next book, I'm gonna just say when you write the next book, we will
Yeah.
get the
Yeah.
opportunity to do this again, highlight how Book Thinkers has grown and the new book that'll be coming.
Yeah. Hey, well, thank you so much. You asked amazing questions today, and I know we're cut from the same cloth in terms of rising to our potential. So, yeah, I look forward to the continued relationship as well. And obviously, you can hit me up whenever you need me for anything. But yeah, appreciate the conversation, man.